Yep, that's my neighborhood.
Could it get any more cracked out than that? So when was this guy shot?
2 weeks ago, actually.
Yikes.
See, this is why I stay up north.
Nah, man,
much-
Beaver County's Casey.
Mish is already afraid to come to my house.
Yeah.
Wait, Casey's in the safe part of Aliquippa.
Is there such thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm in
That's the
Hopewell
safe
School
part.
District. I'm not in
Well,
Aliquippa School
Yeah, if
District.
anything, you got a more of a heroin problem up there.
Yeah.
Here's the thing: when it comes to where Casey lives, this was a freak incident. This shooting, like this was an off-the-wall type of scenario.
Yeah, dude, it was a Serbian club, so it was probably like two 70-year-old men arguing about something. Who knows? But yeah.
Politics. Fancy stats.
I'll get it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Jesse, there's
Yeah.
something I've always wondered. You grew up in South Heights, right?
Yeah.
Why did you go to Ambridge and not Hopewell?
Well, that's because there was a bus route for South Heights that went right past my front door,
Okay.
but the nearest bus route for Hopewell was like probably like 3/4 of a mile away.
Oh.
Yeah, so like Hopewell School District only go up to Hopewell Heights Road, like you know where that big long white fence is.
Yeah.
Okay, they would only go there, but I live way down more towards Crescent, so I literally like walked out my front door and the bus was there.
Okay.
Plus, like I said, heroin.
Yeah.
It's the Pens Nation radio show, and things kind of get a little crazy sometimes. We're live here with Jesse Marshall from Face Off Factor, Casey Johnston, and Mish Shanmugam. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi.
Thanks.
I love it. So, I almost said the World Series. So the Stanley Cup is almost here. Tomorrow matchup is all set. And it's not the Blackhawks. Maybe the dynasty is dead. Who knows kind of what happens from here for them. But it's LA and the New York Rangers. And hopefully nobody gets shot. I don't know. I don't know where we're going from here.
It's dangerous in Beaver County. You got to be, Casey and I, we have street cred.
Casey's tougher than I realized. That's for sure.
Don't you forget it.
Had I known your hood was this dangerous, Casey, I don't think I would have ever come up to Aliquippa.
Well, I guess word hasn't traveled down to West Virginia about us, so that's a good thing.
We get
Hey,
news like
Nick.
3 years late.
Ty Law, Revis, you name it, man.
Going all the way back to Mike Ditka.
It's a breeding
Dick,
ground of heroes. Tony Dorsett,
I hear Pierre Maguire's from Aliquippa.
that's right.
I was really hoping we weren't going to discuss Pierre.
Oh,
That
you
was
know
my
who's from
only goal of this
Aliquippa?
whole show. Just never touch that topic.
Did I say Maguire? Yeah. Crap.
What other Pierres do you know? Turgeon?
Yep.
Pierre Turgeon for GM.
Yeah,
you heard
he's
it
from-
here first.
He's from Aliquippa.
All of a sudden, that doesn't look like such a bad idea. So, all right. Jesse, are you sold on that whole idea? Like, have you talked yourself into the whole Pierre Maguire talk yet?
No, man, I'm trying to stay as far away as I possibly can until this whole thing is over. I mean, like, I just can't envision why anyone thinks that's a good idea. And it's like, I get that, like, everyone hates him and he's a huge heel, but let's talk about this. He hasn't been in hockey operations for 20 years.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
Let's
Like,
start there.
he's never kind of done hockey operations in the salary cap era, so it's a little bit different than what I'm sure he understands it a bit, and I'm sure he'd be fine kind of if that were kind of what sorry for that, everybody, if you're still here with us on the Pens Nation radio show. Stupid internet stuff. But we're back. We're live.
Are we still live?
It says we are.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, talk amongst yourselves. I'll be right back. I'll find out for sure.
I was making a point about Pierre Maguire. Did you guys hear it at all?
I got dropped right away.
Yeah, same here.
Oh, no, I was just saying how everyone references his, very vast knowledge of junior hockey players. Mm-hmm. And it is impressive. But, knowledge and application are two different things. Like, I know all the colors of the rainbow, but you wouldn't hire me to paint your house.
I wouldn't?
No.
Sure I would.
If you want to give me money, sure, but I wouldn't advise it.
Do we have Jesse?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Have we confirmed that we're live?
I'm trying to now.
Okay. I'm going to keep talking anyways.
Yeah.
So, my thing with Pierre is I feel like you would need an absurdly strong assistant GM for him to actually do his job because, as we've said, he's been out of the business for like 20-plus years, and he hasn't dealt with the salary cap era, etc. So you need another strong assistant GM. You'd kick out a strong assistant GM in Botterill because I can't imagine he'd stay under Pierre. So I just feel like it's too much movement that doesn't accomplish anything.
Yeah, if Jason Botterill doesn't get the job, the Penguins lose him. I think that's a guarantee at this point, which is a shame in its own right. So,
what do you think he would do? Where do you think he would go? Because it's not like there are any other GM spots open for him to go to right now. You think it'd just be another assistant position somewhere else?
I think he'd go to an assistant position with a decent. I think to a place where they're going to give him sort of a Julien Brisebois control over the American Hockey League club and allow him to be just in charge of that in an environment that, I don't want to use the term volatile, but in an environment where he could become promoted quickly. Maybe a place where you have a guy on a short notice. I think he'd be great in a place like New York with the Islanders. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. But just somewhere where he can run an AHL club and step in if needed, pretty quickly. And I think there was a decent amount of talk of him being considered for that Dallas position recently, but that didn't come to fruition. And the Penguins were fortunate in that regard. So he's my lead candidate here. I just put it to you like that. I don't see the Penguins bringing in anybody from the outside. I think his philosophy is different enough that he, is a lot different from Ray in a lot of aspects. And I think that you get a guy that's young and maybe a little bit more brash than what you've had in the past.
No, especially my vote is Brisebois, but I certainly wouldn't be upset if it was Botterill because, at this point, I want to say I trust anything they do, but of course, if it was like Pierre or something absurd like that, I wouldn't trust it at all. But with Botterill, I'd be fine with it. I trust that they know him well enough to know what he brings to the table. I like the idea of Brisebois mainly because I want to see a fresh start from top to bottom, or at least as fresh as you can get. But again, I have no problem with either one, really.
Yeah, and I think that they're pretty similar guys, to be honest with you. They've got similar starts, starting out in more of a legal aspect and then moving, into the finances with the salary cap and becoming very familiar with that, and then, moving into more of the hockey operations part and starting to play a really big role. So they have a lot in common, that's for sure, and I don't think that you could go wrong with either one of them.
On that note, let's get away from the GM talk because I feel like everyone's sick of it. I'm certainly sick of it. We've broken down the season, we've broken down the coaching, the GM, etc. I just wanted to let's kind of move into summer off-season talk and random topics. And the first random topic I really wanted to cover was basically how advanced stats kind of took over the internet over the past season. Of course, everyone goes to you since you're quite the guru with it. So my main question to you to start is actually going to be just how did you get into fancy stats or advanced stats, whatever you want to call it? How did you get into all of it before a lot of us did, really?
It's like talking to a couple guys who were using Behind the Net at the time, which was like the only resource for people who weren't paying money to get the information. So I started by looking at Behind the Net, and it's I wanted to see. I mean, personally, what interested me, and I wasn't really like a numbers guy at all, really. But what interested me was seeing those possession rates and getting a better understanding of, who's taking the share of the work for the team, where are the scoring chances coming from, what combinations are working and aren't working, who's out for the least amount of goals at even strength, just stuff like that. It was a different look at the game, and I still think really only use for it is it complements you watch. I think the culture shift this year was the word of it is law, and there can be no dissension because of what the numbers say. Now you look no further than Sidney Crosby to have that squashed in the playoffs. So, but I just think it's a great compliment to the game, and I think it tells us in a different way what our eyes see, and it gives us backup. We're looking at this year, Orpik and Scuderi were so horrible together that everybody knew that, but we could finally quantify it and say, this is why. So I think it's a good backup to your opinion that you have, and it can also, I think, open your eyes to some things that are going on within a couple different teams in the league.
Now, I know one big thing with the advanced stats, and I hate calling them advanced stats because they're really not that advanced. They just all have weird names based on who came up with them.
I like to call them niche extended statistics.
Yeah, I like that. I can get behind that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go with that for the rest of the show. We're talking about extended statistics.
Let's pioneer this. Let's get it started.
I like this. Make sure you trademark that. I'll do the paperwork for you. We'll make sure you start making money for this.
Okay.
Okay, so with extended statistics, sample size is a huge deal because I know, I've read through Rob Volman's book, whatever, I can't even remember the title of it anymore. Whatever he put out before this year was just pretty much explaining extended statistics and also talking about who the best players were and everything. And he talked a lot about sample size. His big thing throughout his book is the fact that you need seasons and seasons of sample size for a lot of these numbers to judge individual players. But what we have seen a lot of this season is game by game, everyone looks at the stats from every individual game, and sample size kind of gets lost in that picture. And I kind of noticed in the playoffs, I felt like sample size was kind of an issue there because it's not like you have a huge sample size to work with in a 6 or 7 game series. You're going to get all kinds of quirks that sample size won't correct for. So in terms of sample size, I guess, how many games do you like to see before you start judging based on extended stats?
35, I think, is a good start. I like to stick, in the 30 range. I think you start to see things on a bigger scale. Here's the thing. Rob Volman's got a point because Matt Niskanen is making it for him. A lot of people are talking about the amount of money Matt Niskanen's going to make in the offseason, and statistically speaking, the bulk of the win share this year, he was probably the best defenseman in the National Hockey League if you were just looking at numbers. You weren't paying attention to anything else, but his on-ice play backed that up. He was unbelievable. But let's go back to last year and the year before that, and just his total tenure with the Penguins is very much of a guy who's a 5th or 6th defenseman on this team. Only was it this year which happened to be a contract year, where those numbers, had a drastic shift, and he became very Letang-like, in a lot of aspects. Whereas you look at Chris Letang, Lord knows what he went through. This was an off year for him. But again, people forget the bulk of the work he's done since 2009. He's flat out been one of the best defensemen this team has had, or in the league at all, especially from an offensive standpoint. So there's that, I think, that we've got to look at that first. In the playoffs, I think there's validity to looking at things on a game-by-game basis because line matchups become such an important thing. And the systematic style of play that you're employing becomes such an important thing. Go back to that Rangers series. The Penguins, in the numbers back, the Penguins lost to the Rangers. We lost those games. They lost in fashion that's very similar to the way they lost against Boston, against the Canadiens. These are trends that we see. So, we're looking at this. We know the Rangers kind of tighten up defensively, and they start, utilizing Lundqvist. It's reflecting in what's happening in the numbers. We can see this stuff. We can see the Marc-André Fleury save percentage at 5-on-5 is terrible. And despite the fact that the Penguins are out shooting the opposition, 3-1, they're losing the game. So, I think you have to take everything with a grain of salt when you're looking at this game-by-game stuff, but we want to know whether or not the Penguins' third line is getting annihilated against the Rangers' third line. We're going to know that by looking at the trends of those numbers over a 7-game series. So, if you look at the big picture, Mish, you could say, I think, I can't remember who it was, but maybe it was some obscure forward had the best possession numbers in the National Hockey League this year. That's just because he played enough minutes to happen to qualify for that statistic, and his sample size is so much smaller than everyone else's, it didn't have a chance to even out. So those anomalies, I think, are easily picked out. I think there are things you can find and say, that's kind of stupid, we don't have enough evidence for this. But overall, I think there's validity to pretty much everything.
All right, and Mish, Rob Volman's book was Hockey Abstract.
Thank you. I have it on a bookshelf behind me, but I was too lazy to go figure out where it was. It is a great book. I would suggest it to everyone because it's a nice little intro into extended statistics. Jesse, getting back to Matt Niskanen, as you said, this season really, I don't think anyone really saw this season coming, and it was off the charts compared to his previous seasons. In terms of sample size and everything, you would think his previous seasons would pull him down. So how much do you figure it's a trend upwards or it's just an anomaly, and how do you decide that?
Well, I think you have to take the environment and the situation into consideration here because, this is a guy who the Penguins got at probably the lowest of low points of a pro career, to a point where, when he left, a lot of people said this is addition by subtraction. They can't believe the Penguins actually accepted this guy in a trade. And in the Philadelphia series, which was an unmitigated disaster, he was the best player. So you walk away and you get a very short time with the team. You say, wow, here's a guy who stepped in and was the only guy that didn't lose his mind in a rival playoff series. So, but then it kind of leveled off, and it was like, he's doing okay. This is, he's having, he's not where he was that playoff run against Philly, and it's kind of fallen off statistically. And then all of a sudden this year, boom. So you have to say, is the guy finally getting comfortable? Is he figuring it out? Is this the change you were hoping for when you brought him into a new environment? The other thing I think you have to take into consideration is he didn't have a choice. This was the good thing about it is that these numbers come with a large increase in minutes, almost a doubling of minutes. For his NHL norm, which is great. So you're seeing a large share of work here. So can he replicate it? Previous seasons tell you no, and I think you have to take that into consideration. But maybe he's a guy who's still relatively young, figured it out, and maybe this is a normal thing now. And there's really the only thing that's going to tell us that is what happens next season. And the unfortunate part is he's a free agent now. So, somebody's going to come in, and I think that, with the way it's working now, pay him a lot of money. And is that warranted? I don't know. Ask David Clarkson,
Ouch. Harsh example there.
Yeah.
I have a feeling it's going to be the Avalanche or a team along those lines that find out about Niskanen, but I surely don't see it being the Penguins. One last question from me at least on pretty much the process of how you watch a game and I guess how you include extended stats as well. I guess just from start to finish, how do you watch a game and judge players? What's the process you go through in evaluating a game, I guess?
Well, it's probably the same way you guys do it, I think. I don't watch extra skater during play. I'll check it out at the end of the period, and I don't think sometimes I think it tells you things you never would have guessed. There were a couple times against Columbus where Crosby ends the first period, having outshot the Jackets 10-0, at even strength. And you're like, wow, I didn't realize it was that bad, and I kind of get a feel for what's happening there. But I don't think it changed the perception of how the game should be viewed. I think it, like I said, just provides a little bit more insight into what's happening on the ice. But I think the go-to is always understanding how the Penguins play hockey first. I don't think it's fair to evaluate anybody if you don't know what they're trying to accomplish. And then from there, seeing how those pieces fit and, what's happening on the ice. So I don't think it's really. I wouldn't say it's changed the way. Besides, I watch so much junior hockey that there's no advanced stats for junior hockey. When you watch, when you're watching stuff for the draft and you're making notes, you're not paying attention to some of the extracurricular stuff that's going on. Whether that be stats or pretty much anything else in the game but that player. So I think that's helpful as well.
With how much advanced stats focuses on the NHL, do you think it's only a matter of time before junior hockey starts getting that?
It's going to take somebody that doesn't have a whole lot else to do. Which, I mean, if you don't believe in advanced stats, you probably would make the argument that's everybody that talks about it. But I think somebody there's going to have a little, grassroots sort of a run to get that stuff implemented, and I think it's just a product of somebody being willing to do the work to make those numbers available. But if it keeps on the track it's on now, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, they were available for the Olympics. I don't think a lot of people thought that was going to happen. So when a couple sites came out and started tracking that stuff for international tournaments, I think that was a trend in the direction of it just trickling down to other levels.
Now, you guys mentioned earlier that, it's not really an advanced stats kind of thing, because there's nothing really that advanced about them. But there is a lot of confusion about exactly what is Corsi, what is Fenwick. Jesse, I'm going to have you explain Corsi, because you're Corsi till you die. And I'm going to have Casey explain a little bit about the Fenwick system. So just for listeners that are kind of confused about this whole thing and they don't really get advanced stats or anything like that, give them a little glimpse of what exactly Corsi is, Jesse.
Well, the NHL doesn't keep, the official time on attack statistic anymore. You can't go and look and see how much time somebody spent in the zone with the puck, which is deceiving in its own way, because the Penguins could stand around the perimeter for 25 minutes in the offensive zone and not do anything with it, and you're going to look at that and say, oh my God.
Power play.
Right, yeah, great. So Jim Corsi is the guy who came up with it, and initially was intended to gauge a goaltender's workload during a game. Because, goaltender's only getting credit for saves. That doesn't mean that he's not flopping all over the place when pucks aren't hitting the net, or, if they're getting deflected up into the glass, or they get shot wide, or they hit the post, or they get blocked, that's not, that there's work that's involved with that inherently. Goaltenders have to react to these things. So initially intended to track that sort of thing, and then expanded into more of this wholesale view of the game. So what Corsi is that raw number of shot attempts, shooting attempts. They don't have to be on net. So, if we think about it, if the Penguins take an attempt, 58 shots in a game, that includes shots that are blocked, that hit the post, that go wide, that deflect off sticks and fly up into the glass. And the opposition, takes 40 on the Penguins' net. We'd say the Penguins were plus 18 in shooting attempts, and generally speaking, it would indicate that they had the puck in the offensive zone a little bit more than the opposition did. Now, shot attempts, the big argument is they don't always denote possession. You could come in the zone and shoot it and turn it over, and it would make a big difference. Well, yeah, right. That's why we look at an entire game. The stuff tends to even itself out over time. And then we can break it down, and we could look at just Sidney Crosby and say, okay, well, when Crosby's on the ice, here's how many shots the Penguins are taking, here's how many shots the opposition's taking, and it gets us, again, an idea of how much time is Sidney Crosby spending in the offensive zone, and what's he doing when he's down there. So, over the course of a season, we track this overall, and it tells us who the best possession players in the league are, and it's a really good idea of which way the ice is tilted. You take it, Casey. Pass the mic. Popcorn, Casey.
And then on the other side, you have Fenwick, which is named after a blogger named Matt Fenwick, which is very similar to what Jesse explained with Corsi, except Fenwick does not count blocked shots. It considers blocked shots an intentional art. They were never going to be scoring chances. So Fenwick doesn't look at them. A lot of people will say that Fenwick is probably more of a useful stat over the long term. So a lot of guys you'll see will use Corsi for, players and Fenwick for team stats, or they'll use Corsi if they're looking at a couple games at a time versus like a whole season. And that's pretty much how I look at Fenwick. Jesse, how do you? I know you've said before you use Corsi for the regular season and Fenwick for the playoffs, right?
I just think Fenwick sometimes becomes more important in the playoffs because the frequency in which you see block shots increases. Now, you also get sort of a decrease in sample size with it inherently, too, because you're counting less. There's not as much included in it. But I think that over the course of time, especially if your team's accustomed to getting into the second or the third round, it's a good thing to look at because, the frequency in which you see block shots increases during the playoffs, and it becomes such an important part of the game.
Now, this is probably the nerdiest show we've ever done. And it's kind of cool, though, but whenever you hear kind of the argument for these Corsi numbers and these Fenwick numbers from the diehard guys, obviously you kind of use these as more of a kind of a way to supplement kind of what you see on the ice, but a lot of people, it's do or die for these stats. What kind of comes across your emotions whenever you hear people doing stuff like that to something that you love so much?
Well, I think that it dissuades people from trying to learn about it, first and foremost. It's not like some elite. I don't get like a dues, I don't get money, for this. There's no there's no incentive for me to promote it.
It's a Corsi Illuminati.
And people feel like it's some exclusive club, like it's not a country club, it's available to everyone. Mm-hmm. Anyone can go on Extra Skater and just play around on there and come up with their own conclusions. It doesn't have to. It's not for professional use only. So I think that the number one thing is I think it dissuades people from wanting to learn about it because, you get such a kind of more of a pompous attitude towards it, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just a real turnoff, I think, for people. And in addition to that, there's not enough evidence. We haven't been doing this long enough to know that this stuff is airtight and not changeable. There's a lot of trends. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's you could look and say, okay, every team that wins the Stanley Cup is within this area, right? That's true. Okay? You could say the other thing is a couple people sat down with a stopwatch and did the old-fashioned NHL way of doing it, and then compared that time on attack to what the Corsi percentages were, and they matched. So, hey, it makes sense. It's something that actually is applicable to real life, but that doesn't mean that there's not mass exceptions to these things. This is not some kind of airtight science. You're not performing a blood test on somebody. This is stuff that's subjective in a lot of ways, and I think it's subjective in a lot of ways. And again, I hate to use Sidney Crosby as an example, but if you'd only looked at Sidney Crosby is still the best possession player in the NHL playoffs. He has not been usurped. But then look at his scoring line, and it's like, what happened? So that's just one example of these things. Hot goaltenders happen. The Kings might find out about that. You never know. I mean, it's just, you could look it on a paper and say, well, LA is a heavy favorite, but there's no advanced metric that's going to account for Henrik Lundqvist. So until that is invented, I think you need to just take the eye test and the stats hand in hand.
Yeah, that's fair to say. I mean, for me, I know it was one of those things where, I had nothing against it, but there was such a pompous attitude amongst, the traditionalist Corsi people. I don't even know if you could say they're traditionalists, but because it is relatively new. But, it was just such an arrogance about it that it was you know what? I don't care enough about it right now, but, lately I've been getting more and more into that, and you really do see the use in it. I mean, the more you kind of utilize that tool, it really does play itself out. I thought you just hit the nail on the head there.
Well, if you're working in your part-time to promote something and provide a service to people because you're good at having algorithms that figure this stuff out, you're of course going to approach it in a way that is presented as infallible. This is a life for a lot of people, and I think that that's washed over in a lot of ways. But I think that again, the more people that, the way I look at it is, the more people that look at this stuff, the more people get to break it down and provide their own opinions, and everybody learns something. So there were some people out there this year that followed it, just for 4 or 5 months and wrote about it better than a lot of other people did. So I think that if you want to learn about hockey, that's a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, I have to say I wasn't a big extended stats person until probably the last month of the season or so. I started looking at Corsi and Fenwick kind of to get ready for the playoffs because I wanted to see if I could add it for the playoffs. And especially with how the Penguins were playing in the playoffs, as you said, possession wasn't necessarily matching up with the results at times, especially against Lundqvist. And it was just amazing how often my observations on players actually matched up with Corsi, more so than what general public perception was, or media perception, I should say, more so. Just what everyone was viewing and what came out of Corsi was a very, very interesting comparison.
Yeah, and I think that, it happens that way. And, there's a lot of axe grinding that happens on the internet. So I think that sometimes that stuff comes in handy because you could say, well, I know that you've been, grinding an axe on a certain person for a while, but guess what? They haven't been all that bad, and, not only am I seeing that, but the numbers tell us that too. So, no, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, though. There's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of conclusions you can draw from what you see on the ice and what's actually happening, on the statistical side of it. I think that Evgeny Malkin's a really good example because no matter who he was with in the playoffs, they weren't doing a lot outside of playing defense. And you look at the numbers and you say, yeah, no, that's right. Gino's had the puck in the offensive zone quite a bit. And the numbers showed that, and his goals came as a result. So I think that, again, just a useful tool to, see both sides of the coin, if you will.
Now, moving on from Corsi and Fenwick, I know another stat that you've talked about, and I'm going to bring up Matt Niskanen again, which I kind of feel bad doing this because it seems like he was just a lucky player this year, but not necessarily the case, but who knows. Regardless, the stat is PDO. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this PDO's probably one of my favorite. It is my favorite extended metric. I guess we could call PDO an advanced. That's one that probably fits into the advanced category. But hockey is a sport that is maybe more so than others predicated quite a bit on luck, right? The puck is always, you have instances where it's bouncing on this ice surface, and guys have sticks that can hit them. Posts happen, bad bounces. Your goaltender, this is a sport where you have a statistic called plus minus that's sometimes judging left wingers on how bad their goaltender is. That's not fair, right? So what we do is, PDO attempts to account for all these things. And the one thing that we know about it is that on a very large scale, all the time, it constantly reverts to the same number, which is 1. It always goes back to 1, or some people calculate it as 1,000, or some people calculate it as 100. This number looks at specific players while they're on the ice at even strength. So we would just look at the time Sidney Crosby is on the ice by himself. Not taking anyone else into consideration, and look at what is the Penguins' shooting percentage when Sidney Crosby's on the ice, and what is the Penguins' save percentage when Sidney Crosby's on the ice. And what that tells us is, how lucky, in a sense, has Sidney Crosby been. Since this number always reverts to the same mean, we get an idea of where he is. Is he hot? Is he cold? Can we expect more from him? Is he playing over his head? This mean of 1, Matt Niskanen spent a lot of time this year, slightly above that average, sometimes way above that average. So you could look at that and say, wow, you expect him to come back down to earth, and it never happened. Not really until the playoffs. He kind of stayed that way all year. Sidney Crosby is so good that he operates normally on a plane way above everybody else. So you're looking at Crosby at 1125, if we use the 4-digit scale here. So just slightly over that average of 1,000. This year he spent most of the playoffs at 925, 930. So, we look at it. His shots weren't going in the net, and Marc-Andre Fleury wasn't saving a lot of pucks when he was on the ice. What are you going to do about that? That's one of those things that you'd expect that number to go up. I wrote on the Trib that I almost virtually guaranteed that it would, and it never happened. So, it's one of those things. It's sometimes, the puck doesn't go in the net, and it doesn't stay out of yours. So, I use the example of Lee Stempniak. What did the Penguins get when they traded for him? They got a guy who was playing on a really horrible Calgary Flames team, and his PDO was in the 800s. So naturally, he gets to the Penguins, he gets on the top line, it skyrockets. You just know and that's not a surprise. You put him on the line with Sidney Crosby, who's in Calgary. How many goaltenders did they play this year? So it's like, it's one of those things that you get a trend, and I can tell you for sure that it's been brought up that general managers have asked about it. There have been NHL general managers that at the trade deadline have looked at this number to say, we need a guy who's just going to be good for a couple months. Are we getting a guy who's hot right now, or are we getting a guy who, are we getting Alex Steen at the beginning of the season, or are we getting a guy like a Crosby, or not Crosby, but a guy who normally plays at a certain level and is below that, a guy we can expect to get better. So it's a number it's one of those numbers that if anybody says, why do you believe in extended/advanced metrics? Well, here you go. This works. It makes sense. It ties in a lot of very important things together, and it's a really, really good indicator of what you could expect to see over the course of the next month of the season, for example.
Okay, now PDO isn't a number that I have picked up on yet, so it's not one that I have a lot of experience with, and I haven't gone through it a lot. But you did mention that Crosby, for instance, is obviously one of the best players in the NHL. His PDO generally would run higher than league average, as you would expect. I assume in general that there are going to be players who run below league average in general. Like, how long do you need to tell where a player's career is going to be, basically?
Well, ironically enough, the fourth line can be tough to look at because they're not getting a lot of even strength minutes. A guy like Craig Adams might play 10 minutes a game, but how much of that is, if he plays 10, 12 minutes, you got to assume if the Penguins take a couple penalties, that's going to be on the penalty kill. So we throw that right out the window. So those numbers maybe aren't as trustworthy as you would maybe think they would be for a guy who's getting top 6 minutes. However, that being said, over the course, by the time you get to the trade deadline, I'll say, that stuff has normalized enough that you can look at it and make a pretty serious judgment. I think the question we have to ask is, how long does it take for this stuff to normalize, right? How long should we be, what kind of time frame should we give to PDO numbers? I don't think it's something you should look at game by game. I think if you want to get a good starting place, why don't you take just 2 weeks? Just pay attention to it 2 weeks at a time and see what you come up with. Or, every 10 games maybe even. You could do 5 to 10 games if you want. But we haven't really, come up with an answer to that question. How long does it take? Well, all year. But, and it's going to go up and down multiple times maybe. But, if you pay attention to it long enough, it's like the stock market, getting an idea of, who's in and who's out right now.
And another question I have, again, since I haven't really looked through this at all, in general, I assume team PDOs will generally revert to 1,000 overall, or if you're going with the 4 digits, 1,000. Do we see playoff teams generally a little bit higher than that, and non-playoff teams a bit lower than that?
I haven't given the team, PDO, something I've used in the postseason a lot for individual players, and I haven't really paid a lot of attention to it on a team basis. Now, I know it does work the same way, for a team structure because you're really talking about the same things here. I think that it's a number that can change quicker because of the bulk. You were talking about a bulk if even strength numbers for an entire roster as opposed to an individual player. But I think that generally speaking, when you look at the postseason, and you're looking at teams that are playing for the Stanley Cup, every single one of them, at some point or another, over the course of 4 rounds, is going to find themselves in a situation where if they're still in it, they're getting help in some capacity. That's something that you have to take into consideration. There's some measure of luck that's going to be involved in winning the Stanley Cup. The Los Angeles Kings and maybe this isn't hugely significant, but the Los Angeles Kings have a PDO of 101, and the Rangers have a PDO of 104. Now, ironically enough, outside of Montreal, those are the two highest numbers in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Well, there's probably a good reason for that, right? Just so happens that those teams are still playing for it. A lot of people have broken this stuff down, Mish, and said, okay, the mean is 100, right? How many goals is 100.5? 16, okay? So that 0.5% swing, okay, that you see in those numbers could be up to 16 goals either way over the course of one season. It's a lot of numbers. That's a lot of goals, excuse me. 16 goals in your own net, you might not make the playoffs. So, that's a pretty significant number for both the Kings and the Rangers. To get to where they got to, they had to come across, whether it be Lundqvist making an insane save or Quick doing the same thing, or the other. I believe there was a game recently here with Montreal and New York where there was like a ton of posts hit. I know it was Game 6. That's what PDO is all about: puck hitting the post and not going in. So look at the teams that are still playing, and the evidence says that they've had that going for them for 16 plus or 12 plus games right now.
Yeah, with the team factor, the one thing I was really keying in on there was, well, you mentioned with Stepniak and Calgary. Calgary was a disaster with goaltending and just overall play. So it's almost an interesting thought to see if GMs would kind of cherry pick off of a team with overall low PDO, try and pick off a player who, like in a buy low situation essentially, or if you have a team where it's a high PDO but they don't think that's actually where they're at. I mean, it looks like a decent way to get buy low and sell high at the trade deadline, depending on what you're looking for.
That's true. I think you have to take the player into consideration that you're getting, because I think at the end of the day, you can trade for garbage, and just because it has a low PDO, that doesn't make a difference. But here's the thing too: every bad team gets hot, right? So you think of the Calgary Flames ended the year with a 99 when they were in that 99 range. The Capitals were well over 100. So the same with the Leafs. The Leafs ended the season at 102. So it's one of those things that this stuff always finds a way to normalize, like we said. So, but you're right, Mish. You look at a team like Calgary, and you say, okay, well, there's a good player on this roster that hasn't really been given a lot of opportunity this year. You got to think if we can supplant him in a place that he could be successful, we're going to reap the benefits of that. And I think that absolutely happened with Lee Stepniak for the Penguins. So there's a lot of credence to looking at it on a very big and small scale to find out who it is you're talking to, when you're evaluating a trade.
Okay, so we've talked Fenwick, we've talked Corsi, we've talked PDO. Give me something for goaltenders.
Yes. Here's the deal. This is not readily available. So I get these formulas basically, okay, from these guys, and I just run the numbers myself. Because they're not. They look at them at the end of the season a lot of times, but there's no checkup, I guess you could say, over the course of a regular season or what have you. So a couple of the ones that I found to be the most interesting. And these are the ones that if I use them, I'm going to primarily, use these ones, I think. These are the ones that make the most sense. I got one called, now you have to be careful because some of the, these acronyms sort of overlay themselves. But goal differential, okay? Goal differential is a statistic we use to, what it does is it measures how many goals your goaltender or a goaltender in question prevented above what the league average goaltender would have prevented, right? So, for example, what we do is we figure out what the league save percentage is, okay? So we have to find out, take all the starting goaltenders in the National Hockey League and crunch an average on that. And we perform a little mathematical, calculation, and we come up with this number that tells us, okay, well, if the league average save percentage is this, and we're going to look at your goaltender's save percentage, his shots faced and his goals against, and we can kind of surmise how many goals he replaced above what the league average would be, right? So it's, Marc-Andre Fleury, here's a good example. Marc-Andre Fleury number all year was 0 because he was the league average goaltender, right? Like, which is okay.
How fitting is that?
And that's great though, right? I mean, that's for Marc-Andre Fleury. That's very good, and we don't want to kind of like assume that an average goaltender doesn't have any value, because playing at a league average earns NHL goaltenders millions of dollars a year. You know, I mean, the being league average as far as goaltending is concerned is not, nobody's ever going to knock someone for that. So, you know, but it just gives you an idea of where your goaltender falls into that slotting. And another one is this great stat called Z-score, okay? So Z-score, think of it this way. Differences in save percentages between goaltenders can be the results of these fluctuations, right? So what this statistic says is, if this goaltender were actually a league average goaltender, facing the same number of shots that goaltender faced, how remarkable would their performance have been, right? So let's suppose that a league average goaltender had a save percentage of 90%, and he faced 100 shots, okay? We would say that the league average goaltender allows 10 goals on 100 shots, right? Well, suppose our goaltender only allowed 8 goals, right? We do a little calculating on these numbers. We could find out how many deviations above or below your goaltender is from what the average, right? So this number gives us a percentage that, like, we'll say anything over 2 or 2 above, 2 points or plus, is significant, right? So Marc-Andre Fleury this year, 1.1. Right at the league average. Henrik Lundqvist in the playoffs, 2.9. That's almost unheard of. Henrik Lundqvist is performing, I mean, one way to put this, guys, is 290% better than any other goaltender in the league. That's insane.
Not bad.
You know? Yeah, not bad, right? Not bad at all. You know, so that's another good one that I like to look at. Here's another one. I'm just new to this, so I'll just give you the basis. Support neutral winning percentage, okay? This one's crazy, and it's really hard to figure out, and I'm not very good at it. But it asks this question: like, if your goaltender played for a team that allowed as many shots on against as shots for, okay, and was playing average NHL talent, what would your goaltender's winning percentage be? Right? So what we're figuring out here is what's your goaltender's winning percentage in the most bland situation you can come up with, right? In a game where shots are even, in a game where you're playing the most average goaltender in the world, right? This metric is guaranteed to be such where a league average goaltender wins 50% of his games. So you can find out Marc-Andre Fleury, his support neutral winning percentage this year is 68%.
So basically, Fleury would have won 68% of his games even without the Crosby offense excuse, even without the hot goalie excuses, etc.
Exactly, 100% right. Yep.
Okay.
That's taking Crosby and Malkin or quality competition out of the equation completely. You're not even taking it into consideration. You're just looking at Fleury's raw numbers. You're looking at his shots allowed. You're looking at the league average. You're looking at his goals against, and you're looking at the league average. All these different numbers, we do this, what's called a Pythagorean formula, and that's how we figure that stuff out. So it tracks. It also could track the variation of your goaltender's game-to-game consistency within a season too. So that's a number that we can actually look at after game one and say, oh, you know, that for Marc-Andre Fleury, you know, he maybe performed above or below expectations in this specific game. So if somebody says to you, did your goaltender steal that game? Well, if you do that calculation and it's 100%, yes, you could probably say that happened. So just kind of another little fun one to mess around with. I just really went off on a tangent there.
I enjoyed it because we're actually moving somewhere with goaltender stats, which is the greatest thing ever. Because with arguments about Fleury, Quick, Lundqvist, I mean, every goalie gets torn apart at some point for some reason, and there's no real basis to back it up except for the eye test and goals against average and save percentage, which everyone knows. I mean, they're just very limited stats.
Yeah, definitely. And these are numbers that are getting more. They're getting popular. We're finding out. They're starting to take strength of schedule into consideration for goaltenders now, as well, Mish. And what they're doing is coming up with this number called opponent-weighted save percentage. Okay, so what you could do is, you could take Marc-Andre Fleury and you could take Henrik Lundqvist, and we could figure out what, or for example, we can even take a league average goaltender and put him against Henrik Lundqvist and figure out how many games they would have won if they had to play the same mix of opponents as the goaltender in question. So do some goaltenders play a disproportionate share of their games against stronger shooters, and does that affect their numbers? So now we're taking goaltender statistics into consideration with shooting percentages. So I think that's even better. I think that's a great place to be heading, and I think that's going to change the way we perceive Vezina Trophy winners in the future.
I don't want to ever be the person who has to calculate any of this, but I'm so glad numbers are actually coming out in the end.
Yeah, the problem, like I said, now these are do-it-yourself numbers. So if you want to figure out, I've got it nailed down in Excel to where I can come up with this stuff pretty easy at this point. But you still, I mean, if you I can look at Fleury's numbers and not bat an eye. But if you want to start looking, like if you even just said, "Hey Jesse, give me the Metropolitan Division," I'm gonna be like, "Oh God." This is gonna suck. Nothing fun about this. So,
once we trademark extended stats and you start getting the money for that, then you'll be sad.
Yeah, I'll hire a team. Yeah, we'll all work out at Casey's house.
I don't want to die.
Casey, I believe you had a question about quality of competition.
Yeah. So okay, Jesse, there's two stats that I see most quoted for quality of competition. One is the time on ice percentage of your competition, and then the other is the Corsi relative quality of competition. What's the difference between the two, and which one do you prefer?
I'll tell you, neither one. I don't prefer either. What I like to look at is behind the net is where I go to get my quality of competition numbers, because I still think that they do it the right way.
Okay.
Not that there's a wrong way to do it. But the numbers that you're looking at are basically saying, what are these players doing when you're not on the ice? So when you talk about relative numbers, they're what's happening when you're not on the ice. So Sidney Crosby's Corsi relative is always like plus 29%, because the Penguins are like 29, 30% better when he's on the ice. Who's surprised by that, So what behind the net does is they're just going to look at your ice time specifically against, and this is kind of what your time on ice is too. So the first one that you mentioned previously, this is kind of like this, but I don't think it's concrete. What behind the net does is they say, we're just going to take the Corsi numbers of the players you're playing against and line them up against you. I mean, so, for example, Sidney Crosby is, quality competition numbers. And what you get out of that, Casey, I should say, the reason that I use that is you see larger variations, okay? Because the numbers, I tried to run numbers off of Extra Skater this year that are similar to the ones that you just talked about, but what you get is a real convoluted type of a situation where everybody's within the same percentage,
Yeah.
And it's difficult to pick out, kind of exactly what's going on there because, at the end of the day, everybody's so tight, that you're having a hard time, figuring out what's going on. So, when you look at the quality of competition numbers that you have, like on a site, like behind the net, for example, what they're going to tell you is they're going to just line up who you're playing against. It's the average Corsi of your opposing players, weighted by head-to-head ice time. So they're taking all of the numbers that exist for all 82 games, right? We're talking about the whole season. And they're just saying, okay, well, the guys you're playing, they have this Corsi percentage, and this is how good they are. So I just think that's the way to do it, because if you're going to do advanced metrics, why not buy in the whole way? So that's the way I look at it. I think that's the best way to do it. I think there's some improvements to be made, Casey, with that whole process. I think it's deceiving in a lot of ways because there are some players out there that have low Corsi percentages. Your boy Brandon Sutter, one of them. Brandon Sutter is a guy whose goals against numbers are astronomically good, but he's getting outshot at an alarming pace. So, how the heck do you explain that? I mean, that's so weird. There's good players that have bad Corsi percentages, so you have to kind of wade through the mud on that stuff, I think, a little bit.
Can you explain that, Casey? Stick up for your boy Sutter.
Why Sutter has bad Corsi numbers?
Yeah. What do you think?
Well,
I mean,
excluding this year because he did not play against the toughest competition. I mean, a lot of the years he is playing against the other team's toughest competition. He's usually, starting most of his shifts in the defensive zone.
That's the biggest one.
Yeah, but in his defense, he does have a high turnaround. He finishes a lot of his shifts in the offensive zone.
Right.
So, yeah, that's...
I'm like Casey's lapdog. Like, yeah, get him, Casey. You get him. Like, you tell him what's going on with Brandon Sutter. Tell him why we should re-sign that kid.
So we're not trading Sutter to Vancouver for Kessler then?
I think Jim Bennings put the kibosh on that whole deal. I don't think Jim Bennings. I don't think Jim Bennings is going to be entertaining many offers in that regard.
I don't know. Pierre can be pretty persuasive.
That's right. Pierre knows where Jim Benning went to elementary school, folks.
The sad part is you're probably right about that. I mean, the guy's an encyclopedia of knowledge. He really is. I mean, who are we kidding? Casey, I was just curious.
I wish Pierre was... By the way, I brought this up yesterday, and I just want to repeat it. I wish Pierre would sometimes commentate on the things I was doing at work. Like, I'm going to the fax machine, and Pierre McGuire's like, there goes Jesse Marshall at FaceOffFactor.com. His homeroom teacher at high school, Miss Henry, just passed away. Super motivated today. Told me before the game, Pierre, I want to go out there, and I want to fax this paper for Miss Henry.
We can get Pierre McGuire and John Madden in the same room. I think that could be quite amusing, I'm sure. Here's a kid that works better with his whenever he gets a coffee in the morning.
Oh, yeah. Boom. Put the paper right in the machine.
It would just be so amusing. So how about this for a troll job? If this whole Pierre stuff actually ends up panning out, Pierre hires Mike Milbury for the head coach and Jeremy Roenick for the assistant. Pens fans would collectively puke and watch each other's heads explode, I'm sure.
Twitter will become the funnest place on the face of the earth.
I'd give up at life.
You know that one season of American Horror Story, you had to pick what your personal, own personal hell?
Mm-hmm.
My own personal hell is a Twitter environment where the Penguins lose 82 games. And, I have to read what people say. I can't ignore it. I can't mute things. That would be it, I think.
You know what? I feel like if they dropped off, all it would take is a couple losing seasons for a lot of people to drop off, I feel like. And I think you'd be okay with what's left over.
You might be right.
Maybe I'm just optimistic. Who knows? We might find out soon enough.
I don't want to find out. I don't want to become the Washington Capitals. That's what I don't want to become right now. And I feel that this is so make or break in a way.
I was just going to say, this was a very important time for the Penguins.
Let's hold on a second, Nick. Nick, we've won some stuff, man.
No, I know.
So the Capitals, who'd they ever beat?
Not the Penguins.
Not anyone. I mean, they've made it to the Cup final once and lost. Let's look. That's the thing. I think, things are bad now, but really, they haven't been all that bad for all that long. We're actually pretty fortunate here.
We are.
Here, let me give you some optimism. We were coming off of a transitional year where there was a much lower salary cap than there was the year before. The Penguins haven't traded themselves into a rebuilding phase like the Flyers have done or like the Capitals have done. The cap's going up. There's room to improve. You don't have to be all depressed yet.
No, I'm not. No. It was just one of those things where you see if the guy comes in and makes a bunch of wrong moves, gets rid of some of these contracts that, some people might not want to see go. I don't know, maybe a guy like Letang, and you don't get the right return for him, and then it kind of really sets you back a little bit farther. So that's what I'm hoping to not see, but we'll see.
I think a lot of the problems that the team has can be addressed by changing the coach.
Yeah, and I thought the same thing with the general manager too. If you look at kind of his overall body of work, he's kind of put the Pens in a tough situation. So, I mean, they didn't really have the best of rosters this season, and part of that was the artificial low of the salary cap, and part of it was they just did a terrible job at developing talent. So, I mean...
a lot of people, we all said last year, we all used the terminology all in last season. We said Ray Shero went all in, and I just really think he did. I think that was it. I think that was the push to get another one, and when it failed, I think you saw a situation where we were left in an even worse position for having made those moves, and I think even if we had won, what would have happened? I mean, had they won the cup, you could argue that it still would have set us back a bit for the future. Of course we win the cup, but what happens next? So I think that either way, losing makes it worse, of course, but I think this is something we all saw coming without really realizing it at the time.
Yeah, and I said at that trade deadline, if the cap wasn't going down the next year, I don't think Ray Shero makes those moves.
Yeah, you could argue that. Yeah, that's a pretty. I think there's validity to that entirely. That was not a last ditch effort, but Custard's last stand sort of situation to try to get something out of this. Get this team over the hump again. And when it didn't work, kind of left things in a state of serious disrepair, especially when it comes to we had to settle. I think that's what happened in the offseason. The Penguins were forced to settle in a lot of ways. Rob Scary is probably one of them. And not only did they have to settle for that, they had to pay too much money to settle for it. So that's even more disappointing. Great, now I feel terrible.
I think every time we talk about Rob Scuderi being a bad contract, Misha's head just inflates a little more.
Well,
it really does.
Mish had a 10-month beat on that. He was 10 months ahead of the game.
It's a shame no one listened.
That's a good example why you don't just look at advanced stats.
Yeah, there's your perfect example.
There's my that's just my putting the hand on the stove moment of the year.
It's okay. On Armchair GM, we can all trade him away and pretend things are good.
Yeah, as long as we have access to Cap Geek, we can do whatever we want.
So, Jesse, before we go, who is your front runner, I guess?
For manager or for who we're picking in the draft? Sorry, that was a shameless plug on my part. So don't forget my ranking.
You're not
going to get one again before
You're not going to miss anyone as badly as you missed Brandon Saad, are you, Jesse?
Oh, Jesus Christ. No. I mean, you just put the kid in the Hall of Fame already, Get him in the Hall of Fame. What are we waiting for? Anyway, yeah. For GM...
Yeah, for GM. We'll have you on again for the draft.
I gotta go Julian Breezewa. Yep.
I mean, none of these guys are super flashy, are they?
No, I don't think so. But I think it's anti-flashy, Nick, in an intentional type of way. Because think about it, I think the most, for me anyway, the greatest thing about Jason Botterill and Julian Breezewa is, like I said, they're young and brash. These are guys that are in touch with the National Hockey League today. Jason Botterill is a guy that knows what's happening on the ice in this league right now. And that's not to say that Ray Shero didn't. I mean, Ray Shero kind of insulated this team in a bad way. In a lot of ways, I think he insulated this team. So I think Jason Botterill and Julian Breezewa are guys that see the game very differently. They evaluate talent very differently. And I think that they're two guys that could put the Penguins in a position to make really business-savvy moves that give the Penguins an ability to bring in more parts. Better parts, younger parts, cheaper parts, parts that are going to be very effective in the way the game is played today, parts that are going to, by that nature, complement Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and Marc-Andre Fleury, because I think those are the three untouchables on this team, if there are any. And Ole Mata is probably another guy I'd throw in there. But if they're going to find a group of players, a pulse of players, and I always use the Brendan Gallagher example, that are going to come in and they're going to know what they're doing and they're going to be very smart and authoritative about it. And I think that's exactly what you want.
Yeah, pretty fair. Pretty fair. Well, Jesse, we'll have to definitely have you on again before the draft. We're, 3 weeks away now from this. Are you going out to Philly?
No, I think the current plan is actually our good friend Ian. I'm sure you know Ian Altenbaugh from Hockey's Future. We're teaming up this year a little bit. So Ian is actually going to Philly for me.
Nice.
And he'll be actually covering it with Face Off X. So we'll be covering it from more of the live analysis standpoint. I'll be on Twitter covering it. My draft ranking will be out probably about a week beforehand. And Ian will actually be there with audio from things and covering it live. So we'll hope to cover all bases in a little tag team effort here.
That's excellent. Excellent. All right. And what are you doing, I guess, coming up to the draft? You probably touch on that just a little bit here, but anything special this year as opposed to just the rankings?
No, we're going to do the top 50. So we'll have our top 50 ranking that'll come out, which will have pretty much any important statistic you could think of about every player, as well as a brief history with a little talent analysis. And then we'll also do sort of like an endorsement list where we say we think XXXXX player are the perfect fit for this team based on what we know about them. So, an exciting thing this year is we won't have to pick 5 defensemen. So that's going to be great.
God, how bad would it be if the Pens' first pick was a defenseman?
You know what? I mean, I wouldn't be upset about it if it was the right defenseman. I think the right guy is always a good way to go. So, like I'll give you an example. There's a young man from Kingston named Roland McGowan, and I think he'd be great because he's 6'1", 6'2", and he's big, and he's not like any defenseman we have in the system at all. Maybe Brian Dumoulin is the only guy you could look at and say, like, or Harrison Ruoff, who, has got a long way to go. So if that happened, I wouldn't hate it. But I will tell you this, the Penguins are surrounded by good forwards and where they're going to be picking. So that is one positive to take away from this, is that the Penguins will be in a position where they may not have a choice but to take a forward. So there's nothing bad about that.
No, definitely not. That's actually a really good thing right now. Hopefully they could replenish their prospect pool and get a few guys in there that could actually potentially, crack an NHL roster and contribute. Right now it's basically the Bo Bennett show as far as forwards go. So we'll see where they go from here, and that's going to do it for us today on the Pens Nation radio show. Later.
Later.
I feel so thug. Let's go to Aliquippa, guys.
Yeah.
Let's
go to the windmill. You guys don't know about the windmill. Casey,
I'm not going anywhere near you guys.
Casey, tell them about the windmill.
Windmill, it's a mini golf course, has awesome soft serve ice cream.
Am I going to get shot there?
No,
it's a mini golf course.
That doesn't mean I can't get shot there.
Nobody's ever been shot at the windmill, I will guarantee you that. The windmill is a place of peace.
First time for everything, Jesse.
It's further away from Aliquippa.
Aliquippa's got a really good Corsi number, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it's low. I'll be honest. This is terrible. Aliquippa, here we go. This is a good analogy. Aliquippa had like the best Corsi going, but then they traded away the steel industry, and it just plummeted. And let me tell you, it has not recovered in any way, shape, or form.
I love it.